Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for showing up on such a wonderful day. I'm Rick Wilson, the director of Scientia, and I'd like to thank you again for attending today's lecture. This year's series has been really interesting, and this unfortunately and sadly is the last of this year's topic on creativity. And people in various disciplines around RICE, we differ in the kinds of questions we ask and the methods we use. But I think what unites us all is the creative principles that we bring with us to our work. And I've called on people throughout the campus and off campus this year to talk about creativity, on how people's imagination works to build things, ideas, concepts, and sometimes literally things. So today we're fortunate to have Marcia OMalley, who's speaking to us on the topic of creativity through courage, leaving the comforts of your home discipline. Professor OMalley is going to address that feeling, I guess, of walking on a tightrope, or maybe a gangplank, when crossing disciplinary boundaries. Her work is focused on the interaction between humans and robots, something that crosses many, many different boundaries. Professor OMalley received a PhD from Vanderbilt University. She started at RICE as a faculty member in the Mechanical Engineering Department, and she's currently the Stanley C. Moore Professor of Mechanical Engineering, currently the Director of Mechatronics and Haptic Interfaces Lab at RICE. She holds a joint appointment in computer science here at RICE, and is an adjunct associate professor in the departments of physical medicine and rehabilitation at both Baylor and UT Med School. Most importantly, she's one of us. She is a member of Scientia. Professor OMalley has been widely recognized. She's a recipient of a 2005 NSF Career Award. She received the George R. Brown Award for Superior Teaching here at RICE in 2008. She's former chair of the IEEE Technical Committee on Haptics, and was on the founding editorial board for the IEEE Transactions on Haptics. Her research program is extensive. Her publications are even more so. Recently, she published, get the title of this right, Hybrid Rigid Soft Hand Exoskeleton to Assist Functional Dexterity in the IEEE Robotics and Automation letters. And I can say, as my various systems fail, I'm looking forward to Professor OMalley and her team to help fix me up. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Marcia OMalley.
All right. Good afternoon, and yes, thank you for coming out at the busiest time of the semester on, I would say, the nicest day we've had so far, but yesterday was a little bit more pleasant than today. But I'm really excited to share with you some of my perspectives on creativity, and so I'll get into the notion of the talk, but I want to acknowledge that a lot of the work that you see presented here, I'll highlight individuals, but is the fantastic output of my lab, who are sitting right there in front of me, so no making faces. So as Rick said, my research is at the intersection of humans and robots, and specifically I'm interested in physical interaction between humans and robots. And when I started in the field of robotics, or if you sort of go back to how robotics came into being, it was really in manufacturing. And most applications of robotics were what we call the 4 Ds, jobs that were dull, dirty, dangerous, or distant, things that we didn't want humans to do. And we could replace humans with robots to ensure their safety, or to take over the monotony of these sort of assembly line tasks. So in all these situations, and if you go to manufacturing plants where you see robots like this, there'll be tape and paint on the floor of where you're supposed to stay away from these robots. But where things get interesting for me is that robots are increasingly moving into our human environments. Today we see robots in healthcare. We see them in our households. Maybe there's one vacuuming your rug as we speak. And also in social settings. And in these circumstances where robots are in our households, they're in close proximity to humans, and physical interactions with humans are inevitable. This is really what's exciting to me. So it is these physical interactions between humans and robots that I see as information-rich exchanges and opportunities that can be leveraged to enhance both human performance and robot performance. So I want to explore that idea a little bit, and let's start with the first part, and that is enhancing human performance. So there's a lot of different research in my lab. This photo features robotic rehabilitation, but how we might use a robotic device to teach or train a human with some new capabilities. So, for example, maybe you want to train a human to improve their motor coordination, such as a surgeon. So you might have a resident using simulators. So this is the picture in the bottom right, using a simulator or a robotic device that can capture data, that can create a rich virtual environment that includes both visual feedback and haptic or touch feedback so that you can practice and feel all the sensations that you're going to feel in an actual surgery. Another application that we see is in rehabilitation. So the top center photo features a physical therapist working with an individual who has some kind of neurological disorder, probably a stroke or spinal cord injury, and they're using the robotic device to deliver therapy. Or maybe you're thinking about your leisure activities and you really want to improve your drive, your golf swing. So the system at the bottom left is really not a medical application at all, but we can have a robotic device that can simulate the feel of the golf swing and be like your virtual coach, so that you get all the experience of the dynamics of hitting the ball. In all of these scenarios, we endow the robot with knowledge of a preferred way of doing a task, and we leverage the physical coupling between the human and the robot to transfer that expertise from the robot to the human. So none of these pictures are work in my own lab, so I have to do a little bit of self-promotion. So the first area of research, a major area of research in my group, has been in this area of developing wearable exoskeleton robots for delivering rehabilitation therapy following some kind of neurological injury. With partnerships in the Texas Medical Center, we're able to understand the problems of delivering therapy, design devices, so we actually design and fabricate these robotic systems, and then we also implement the controller, so we write the software that's going to govern how this robotic device is interacting with the patient, and we can finally use the data available through these robotic devices to assess the outcomes of this therapy. Another area where we focus on transferring expertise from a robot to a human is using haptics, or that force feedback, for training or restoring sensory function. So here we might think about using a virtual environment, like a video game environment, where the robotic device can push and pull and impart forces on the human as they're interacting with this video game to understand how best to control it for a desired outcome. You can think about an application like training pilots, right? Similar to training surgeons, here we might train pilots to control a new vehicle. In the top corner, we've collaborated with surgeons at Methodist for thinking about how we could use these environments and physical interaction between humans and surgical trainees to learn how to move their instruments and tools like an expert would. And another area that we focused on is restoring sensory capabilities in individuals who maybe have limb loss. So we can develop wearable devices that can actually push and pull, manipulate the skin, provide vibration cues that are mapped to the actions that are occurring between the robotic prosthesis and the environment. Recently, we've shifted in my group to looking at more wearable devices, the practicality of being able to leave the laboratory environment with these devices, carrying them along with you. So I show two systems here. These were both developed in collaboration with NASA, Johnson Space Center. On your left is Armstrong, best name ever for a robot when you collaborate with NASA. We had to get special permission to use it. But this is the Armstrong system for the elbow and shoulder. And then on the right, we have the SPAR glove, which is a very long and complicated acronym that I won't torture you with. But the SPAR glove, which is an assistive device for individuals with spinal cord injury. So in each of these three scenarios that I've described to you for the work in my lab, we endow the robot with some expertise or knowledge of a preferred way of doing a task. And then we use that physical coupling between the human and the robot to transfer that expertise through repetition and training over to the human user. So let's turn the tables now and think about how physical human-robot interaction can allow us to take expertise from a human and impart that to a robot. So in the previous example, the robot was the expert, and we were trying to use that physical coupling to transfer the expert surgeon's capabilities to the trainee or the therapist's knowledge to restore function in an individual with stroke or spinal cord injury. Now we have the opposite setting. The human intentionally interacts to correct the robot, to impart its preferences on how the robot is performing a task. So imagine you've purchased your 7 degree of freedom robot arm to bring into your home to move coffee cups around in your kitchen. Work with me here. Okay. And it comes out of the box pre-programmed with a particular way of manipulating your coffee cup, and you don't really care for it. So instead of having you sit down and write code to reprogram that robot, we allow you to physically interact and manipulate, just like you might, like a tennis coach might show you how to change your swing, but now it's the human imparting that expertise to the robot. So the robot has to trust that the expert human knows the right way to perform the task and then respond to those physical interactions and change its behavior. So how should that robot respond? So I'll show just some video here of work of my former student Dylan Losey. So he developed some controllers for robots. His controller is the learning controller on the right, and he's comparing that to the state-of-the-art impedance type controller on the left. The names are really not that important. But what you can observe in these videos is that the learning controller allows the robot to change its behavior to adjust how it's executing the task in response to the human's intervention. And importantly, the human doesn't have to keep intervening. So the impedance controller, the user has to keep adjusting and keep adjusting and keep adjusting because the controller doesn't learn the preferences of the human. But with the learning controller, the robot learns those preferences and retains them for the rest of the task. So the task that you see here, the individual is trying to keep the cup upright so that the coffee doesn't spill. In this task, the user is trying to demonstrate that the robot should carry that coffee mug close to the table, right? So that if it is going to drop it, we don't have a big disaster scenario on our hands. And again, you can see with the learning controller, one very clear physical interaction from the operator to the robot imparts the desired feature of the trajectory, which is to stay close to the table. And the robot then uses that knowledge and incorporates that into the rest of its movements and motions. So now that I've given you sort of an overview of the kinds of research that go on in my group, I want to shift to the theme of the talk. And that is really this notion of creativity through courage and leaving the comforts of your home discipline. So working in the field of physical human-robot interaction, obviously I bring a lot of my mechanical engineering expertise to the design of robotic devices, to the development of the control algorithms. But in all of our applications, we have problems that we're trying to solve that lie outside of our particular discipline. And so I would propose that an interdisciplinary approach to research promotes creativity and enables you to find solutions that are unique or that maybe you wouldn't have come across if you didn't capture those diverse perspectives. So not only do you come up with solutions that are more creative, they're also more robust. So the second thing that I want to do is address the word in my title, which is courage. So why did I use this word courage? I'm trying to characterize that stepping out of one's home discipline or area of expertise really does require some form of courage. When you create interdisciplinary teams to address research problems, these teams exhibit diversity of thought and challenge your assumptions to how the problem should be solved or how you should approach a particular research question. But I would say that this challenge is beneficial, that it is a creative tension, not a destructive tension in the team, if you have the right team. Right? And if you have the right challenge group that you surround yourselves with, then you have a really unique opportunity to address a problem from multiple perspectives. And so I would propose that you have to have courage to establish this challenge group around you to address the problem at the outset. So 3 points I would say. 1, you have to have the courage to be comfortable with both your own expertise and knowledge and recognizing what you don't know. That you may need to depend on the expertise of others to really come to the best solution. And sometimes that's a little bit scary if you've, spent all your education drilling down into one field to now step out, talk to somebody from a different field, and be comfortable that you don't have all of that knowledge and expertise that they bring. Second, I would say that you need courage to learn a new vocabulary. So one of the experiences that has been really formative for me is that you need to develop a common language to communicate with your research team and to communicate your research to your team and to know what you're talking about. So often you may find that with an interdisciplinary collaboration, you use different words that mean the same thing, and it could take you months to figure that out. You might also use the same word and think you're on the same page and then realize 6 months later that that single word has very different meaning from your own fields. So you need the courage to learn this new language, to understand that you really have to probe and question and understand the perspective that each of you is bringing to the research effort. And third, I would say you need courage to trust. You have to trust the perspectives and ideas that your team members bring. And that the trust that this sharing of perspectives and building of an interdisciplinary team can lead you to identify new opportunities and new avenues for research. Also, that this approach, this interdisciplinary approach to research, will heighten the value of the work and the potential impact of your ultimate solution. So now that we have lots of courage, we're going to head off into our interdisciplinary research efforts. And I want to propose 3 key advantages that I see to taking an interdisciplinary approach to research. So first, I believe that taking an interdisciplinary approach ensures that, first of all, you're solving the right problem. Second, I think an interdisciplinary approach is important because it increases the likelihood of both a robust and impactful solution. And third, and maybe most importantly, I think an interdisciplinary approach to research helps you maintain the perspective on your work itself. So, to illustrate these 3 advantages that I see in interdisciplinary research, I'm going to use some example research projects from my lab, kind of walk you through how the project came about and the different perspectives that our interdisciplinary collaborators bring to our efforts. So, for our first case study, the first advantage that I see to interdisciplinary research is that it ensures that you're solving the right problem. So this story centers around a recent graduate of the Mahi Lab who is not here to defend himself. So this is the work of my student Chad Rose. And Chad was conducting his PhD research in a lab that's focused on rehabilitation robotics. We design robotic devices as interventions to restore movement coordination following stroke and spinal cord injury. And Chad was working on a really neat collaboration with NASA, Johnson Space Center, to take some technology that NASA had developed for powered spacesuit gloves and translate that to a robotic device that could assist movement. So the NASA problem was that when you pressurize a spacesuit during extravehicular activities, spacewalks, the astronauts lose dexterity, and they wanted to add actuation motors to the gloves to restore the dexterity of the astronauts. Chad saw an opportunity to take that application, take that technology, and bring it to rehabilitation robotics so that we could restore dexterity to the hand, which is really instrumental to regaining function and independence for people in this population. So Chad's working on his glove, and he's, hours whittled away in the lab. And during the course of his studies, there's other research going on, and we were testing an upper limb exoskeleton. I'll feature it later. We were testing an upper limb exoskeleton, and we were bringing in individuals who had spinal cord injury. And Chad, they're there for several hours, and they, strike up some conversation. And the individuals who were participating in the rehabilitation with the exoskeleton kept saying two things. First, they would say, getting function in my arm back would be great, but if I can't use my hands, then what good is the regained function in my arms? And second, well, I really believe in what you're doing in terms of restoring movement coordination using robotics. Can you just make me a glove that I can take home so that I can pick up my phone, turn the doorknob, and not have to depend on other people? And so Chad had already expressed this interest in developing this glove, and he was working on some early prototypes, but he had always been thinking about it as a device for the clinic that would be used by therapists as a rehabilitation tool, and it would stay at the clinic, and the participants would go home with no glove. And he kept hearing from these participants, can you just make me a glove to go home? I really just want to have function. And he got to thinking, well, wow, that's a real shift in my focus of my research. We discussed it, and I said, I think if that's the problem you're hearing, then it's important to address that problem. And so, wisely, Chad recognized that if we really wanted to address this problem, we couldn't just rely on the one subject who told us this when he came to the lab. We needed to collect more information from a diverse set of end users. So at the same time, Rice has this IDEA fund for interdisciplinary research. It's another acronym with lots of words that I can't remember right now. But Chad put together a proposal for the IDEA program. And he pulled together a really fun team of experts across our campus. So IDEA requires that you find a team that spans schools. So Chad had expertise in engineering design and had developed some early prototypes of his glove, and he had the expertise of the NASA engineers who were supporting some of the technical developments that he was working on too with his prototyping. And then he went and found Zoe Wool in anthropology. And Zoe's background is in, make sure I get this right, because it's a different vocabulary for me, right? Zoe's expertise is in ethnographic fieldwork and in medical anthropology. And I'm going to quote her because she says it better than myself. She is specifically interested in questions of personhood and the body at times when the body becomes unsteady. And so she uses an approach to gathering user perspective that was quite different than my own. I was used to talking to therapists who were used to running studies with the robot, but Zoe brought a perspective of how to reach out to the end users and to conduct that research in a rigorous way with tools that we didn't have in our toolbox. And third, he went and got Phil Cordham from the Department of Psychological Sciences, who has expertise in human factors and engineering psychology, who could ask real questions about usability and feasibility of our end prototypes. It can be a beautiful piece of engineering, but if the users can't understand how to use it, it's not very useful. So Chad pulled this team together, and using the techniques of structured surveys and access that we gained to large populations of spinal cord injured subjects, Zoe's approach to ethnographic fieldwork to gather those perspectives, and his own interactions with participants in our lab, Chad was able to design a glove that is both a really nice piece of engineering, but also is functional and valuable to the users. So what's unique about his glove is it lies in the middle of this spectrum of rigid to soft devices. There's a big push in robotics right now, soft robotics. We don't want these rigid robots, these alien exoskeletons on our bodies anymore. We want everything to be soft and conforming. But a downside of that is that these soft actuation and soft robotic devices don't have enough torque output to really do any useful work. So if you're talking about assisting in restoring dexterity of the hand, they really don't have those capabilities. They're also not precise in their control. But if you look at the rigid spectrum, nobody wants to wear that thing, right? It uses thumb screws to tighten down on your fingertips go numb. It's just not practical. So Chad was able to kind of split the difference and find a solution that has the advantages of a rigid system and that it has specific rigid components so that we can apply larger forces and really have a glove that can help these people grasp and do everyday tasks, but is conforming enough that it's comfortable and can be worn. So here's just some other details. And I think what was really interesting, again, there's some great engineering, design, and innovations in here, but the amount of time Chad spent on aspects that were not what we would have considered, right? So the first time he took the glove to test with the participant to see if they could put it on, they couldn't put it on by themselves. So what good is an assisted glove if you need assistance to put it on? And so Chad integrated some unique features like BOA fasteners. So if you've ever been a snowboarder and you've got your snow gloves on and you need to tighten your snow boots, this circular thing on the back of the hand, you just put your hand down and you twist. So somebody with limited dexterity can tighten a lacing system of the glove around the hand. He also integrated a rigid bar right across the palm. That helps us transmit loads to actuate the glove. And he has a strapping system inspired from boxers of how they take their hands before a boxing match, so that, again, he's got some good anchor points. And then to assist the individual in putting their hand in the glove, he found the glove pilot, which looks like a shoehorn and was invented by a mom who had trouble getting her kids' hands into their gloves in the wintertime. So it was, again, this sort of open-mindedness about solutions to developing an assistive glove and focusing on the whole spectrum, right? From how is this individual going to put the glove on to also how is the glove going to function. So here's some video showing some early testing of the glove and achieving some important grasps that we use in our everyday tasks. So a cylinder grasp, a pinch grasp, and you just have to trust me that the glove is doing this, not the person in the video. And the capability of this glove to do thumb opposition is important for the different poses that it can achieve. All right. So with this project, we really gained perspective on solving the right problem. Chad has set out to find a solution for rehabilitation of the hand, and in the end, developed a glove that assists. It doesn't necessarily restore function independent of the glove, but it gives somebody function and capability so that they can live more independently. So the second advantage that I see to these interdisciplinary collaborations is that it increases the likelihood of a robust and impactful solution. So this is a project that was solicited by Facebook. Facebook was interested in a solution for haptic communication. So haptic refers to the sense of touch, and we were challenged to produce a system that could be worn on the arm with a small footprint and that could transmit the English language through patterns of tactile or touch cues. And they gave us some pretty specific design criteria, and they wanted us to integrate some of our experience in developing wearable haptic systems that we had integrated previously in projects for advanced prosthetics. And then also to think about how we would map language to these different haptic cues. And so what was really interesting about this is the first initiation of the contract or grant from Facebook required an interdisciplinary approach that I'll describe on the next slide. And it was interesting to assemble a team that would challenge our own theories and assumptions about how this would best be done. And there were several instances throughout the course of this project, and continue to be, where assumptions we made about what would be the best way to proceed were proven wrong, and they were proven wrong because of the expertise and tools and methods that the collaborators brought to the collaboration. So it can be maybe burdensome to overcome challenges posed to you by others who think you should solve the problem differently, but in overcoming that burden and working with your collaborators, you ensure that the solution you come up with is more robust and then potentially more impactful. So the team for this one, it's an evolving team, and it's still evolving. But we started out with several members of my group. So Nathan and Jenny did a bunch of the early work, and Alex has come on to join this team. And we took some wearable haptic feedback devices that we had already developed in the lab for other applications, and we combined them. So a band that squeezes the arm, a rocker that stretches the skin, and vibration cues that we can provide at different locations on the arm. We integrated these into one wearable prototype. Now, the second piece of the puzzle was, I would say, almost mandated by Facebook, is they had other teams working on other solutions for this problem, but they were specifically interested in how we might use machine learning to best map the English language to these haptic cues. And so I went to Rich Baranick and said, Rich, can you help me? I don't know how to do this. And what Rich was able to do, we already had a lot of data about how people perceive the haptic cues. So if we give them combinations of vibration and stretch and squeeze, there are certain patterns that they're always able to perceive correctly and other patterns that they often make mistakes. And so Rich was able to take that data about the confusion, I put some confusion matrices up there, about the confusion that we would observe as people perceived the haptic cues. And then there's also some rich data sets out there about the confusion that people make when they're listening to spoken English. Certain sounds that are mixed up, right? Fit might sound like thip, right? They're phonemes that are close. And so he pulled together that data set as well and was able to advise us how best to match a haptic cue to the language to minimize confusion when we displayed this to our participants. This is an evolving project, as I said, and Alex, who joined the lab this year, is interested in bringing in two more fields. So we've partnered with Simon Fisher-Baum from the Department of Psychological Sciences, and Simon's expertise is in cognitive psychology and speech perception, especially in individuals who are suffering from stroke. He uses non-invasive neural imaging techniques to understand the language processing. And then Jeff Yao at Baylor College of Medicine, who has expertise in perceptual neuroscience and how the brain responds to different tactile stimulation. And so Alex is interested in exploring how, now that we have a system, which I'll describe in a minute, that can transmit the English language through touch, do people perceive that differently than language that they receive auditory or language that they read? And the expertise of Jeff and Simon and the prior success we had using Rich's inputs means that we have now a language transmission system that is quite robust and will help us shed light on these other scientific questions. So our system is called the Themachimissive. I define the acronym on the next slide, so I'll wait for that. It's a compact actuator system that's designed to render a variety of what we call multisensory cues, so combinations of stretch, squeeze, and vibration on the arm. So we've got one module that can stretch the skin from side to side. We adapted this from a project where we were providing pose information of a prosthetic hand back to an amputee. Then we have a band that can squeeze. This was also adapted from applications in control of prosthetic devices. And then we have a band with 4 vibrotactors. And so if we actuate these systems in concert, then we get a bunch of different cues that we can convey. So many pilot testing occurred, And then we came up with an approach to presenting cues to the user, so the haptic cues themselves. So every cue that we convey is of a length 350 milliseconds. It is composed of a squeeze component, and so the squeeze can either be delivered or not. It's composed of a stretch component, which again can be delivered or not, and then a vibration component. We have 4 different tactile locations, and for each location we can provide a short cue, a long cue, or a double cue. And so with this combination you end up with 48 total available haptic cues that we demonstrated through pilot testing that were discernible, and 350 milliseconds to present each cue. So with Rich's input from the confusion matrix data about how people perceive the haptic cues and what confusion that we observe, and also knowledge of what confusion exists when you hear spoken sounds, we mapped phonemes, which are parts of the spoken English language, to these haptic cues. So there's a visual representation here of the 4 different tactile locations, that's the circle around the outside, and which cue we're providing on the tactor, and whether we're squeezing or not squeezing, or stretching or not stretching. But you can imagine here that we've got some combination of patterns that we're relating to a phoneme. So let's see if I can do this right. Nathan and Jenny do this better than me. All right, so if squeeze is on, so on the green background, and stretch is on, and we're vibrating the left vibrotactor, that means ooh, as in ooze, right? And so you would feel these cues, and you would build them together to create words that you can perceive. So we developed a training protocol for training people, so they get first exposed to, briefly exposed to the cues themselves, then they get exposed to how those cues match up with different phonemes, and then we start building those phonemes together into words. And so this video shows the testing environment that we use. So the user can play the next phoneme, they feel it on the missive system, then they're displayed with a multiple choice, and they choose which word they felt. So over the course of this project, we demonstrated that with, I think, 10 subjects, 100 minutes of training, we had 90% accuracy in a multiple choice selection of the words that they were displayed, out of a vocabulary of 150 words. And then a subset of those subjects continued with additional training for several more days, and they can do free recall at about 75% accuracy. So no multiple choice, you have to actually know what you're feeling. So this continues to be a really exciting collaboration. I am way out of my comfort zone with very much of this, and I'm definitely trusting my collaborators to bring their expertise so that we can answer some really interesting scientific questions. The third advantage that I see in these interdisciplinary collaborations is in maintaining perspective. So we develop devices for robotic rehabilitation, as I mentioned before, and to achieve that, it's necessary that we collaborate with our clinical partners in the medical center. So the work that I'm going to highlight here is carried out by my research assistant, Jenny Sullivan, with expertise in rehabilitation robotics, with a collaborator from University of Houston in the Department of Electrical Engineering, Pepe Contreras-Vidal, who has experience in non-invasive neural control. Our clinical collaborator, Dr. Gerard Francisco, who's the chair of physical medicine and rehabilitation at UT Health Science Center, and Marcia Brennan, who has experience in medical humanities. So in rehabilitation robotics, the motivation for using robotic devices is that they're really ideal for delivering intensive repetitive movement therapy. This high-intensity therapy that's known to induce neuroplasticity and retraining of the brain and motor control system following injury. And as an engineer, I get really excited because these robots have sensors all over them, which means we get a lot of data. And when I get a lot of data, I really like to analyze that data, right? So we have this collaboration with these other institutions, and our objective is to increase cognitive engagement of stroke participants during robotic rehabilitation. We're using a non-invasive brain-machine interface. So this is the contribution of Pepe Contreras-Vidal. And we're controlling a therapeutic exoskeleton, that's me, And we're working with the clinical population of stroke. That's Dr. Francisco. So participants wear this cap. They use motor imagery. They imagine their arm moving. Pepe works his magic. He detects movement intent. We command the robot to move. And then there's therapeutic benefit to this. And all the while, we're collecting data. Data. So my clinical collaborators create charts like this. So this is the Fugel-Meyer score. And the improvements we see in the Fugel-Meyer, which is a assessment of function and level of impairment of stroke-impaired individuals. So we have bar charts for each subject, and we can see that at baseline, they're a light gray, and it changes about this much. And if you look at subsections, you can dig down into this data, and you can possibly find things that are statistically significant. Possibly. Right? It's really challenging work. Our subjects are really heterogeneous. Some respond to the therapy, some do not. We don't understand why. Some do and some don't. And so we dig and we dig for statistical significance in our outcomes. And then Jenny makes plots like this, which are amazing, right? So I have to explain what we're looking at here. So we like to see how movement coordination changes over time. So what you're looking at on the left is the individual's velocity versus time in a trial, normalized over many, many trials. So this is the first 10 trials when they come in for therapy. And what this means is that their movements are really jerky, non-smooth, and not very useful. And after therapy, their movements smooth out. Their velocity profiles are converging to a single bell-shaped profile, which we know is optimally smooth and great for function and independence. And we can dig through this data and we can pore over it looking for statistical significance, and we may find it and we may not. And even if we find statistical significance, it's unclear if that has clinical significance. But we try, but it's difficult work. So we trudge on. But what's been really fantastic about this collaboration, and I think what's important, especially with this work that has translation to the clinic and to populations that have movement impairment, is that sometimes you just need somebody to help you maintain the perspective of why you're doing what you're doing. So a year or so ago, Marcia Brennan calls me up. She's like, can we collaborate? I have some great ideas. And she had wonderful ideas. So Marcia started coming to the lab when we would bring participants to do our rehabilitation sessions. And she interviews them, and she talks to them, she gets to know their families, and she turns their words into poetry. So I'm going to leave you with this thought. Well, I have one more slide after this, but in terms of the benefits of interdisciplinary work. So I think Marcia's ability to capture Nick's thoughts about his role in the research were really moving. So the poem says the two go hand in hand. Why does this matter? Because I want to continue to progress and become more independent. I like helping with research on the nature of paralysis. Maybe this may not help me, even in the future, but it may help people in similar situations. What do the engineers need to know? They need to know that there are two things that matter. There's the physical side, and there's the mental side to this. Physically, it's about doing what's going to work best for paralysis. Mentally, it's about how important all of this is to everyday life. When I do better physically, my mental state improves. So when I do better and improve, this reinforcement helps both sides. The two go hand in hand. And I think when you're poring over data and trying to find statistical significance, and if you can just read these words, you really understand why we do what we do and the real value in bringing those diverse perspectives to a research effort. So my tips for you, if I've convinced you to venture into interdisciplinary research, is that there are some key ingredients for successful collaboration. They are people, partnership, and skin in the game. For people, you really need a sound working relationship, shared values, and a common vision and goal. And this has to be established early on. Everybody needs to be understanding of what we're working towards. It needs to be a real partnership, an intellectual partnership, a shared pursuit of scientific inquiry with mutual respect for each team member's contributions, with open lines of communication, finding that common language that you can speak. And finally, everybody's got to have skin in the game. Right? If you're not making some commitment to the project, you're not bought in. That doesn't need to be money. Right? It can be a commitment of your time, it can be a commitment of just your effort or the effort of your team, or it can be a commitment of resources. And these have been, when I've been able to have these three things combined together, it's been really a fantastic opportunity. Thanks for the chance to talk to you today.
Marcia's agreed to take a couple questions, so if anyone has a question, don't be shy. So, what is the backstory on Armstrong?
What is the backstory on
The
Armstrong?
backstory on Armstrong.
I mean, so the Armstrong project it's a DARPA-funded project. They had a program called Warrior Web where they were trying to develop suits to make warfighters more effective. But DARPA also wanted to find terrestrial applications, and NASA was interested in terrestrial applications of their technology. So we partnered up to develop this wearable exosuit for rehabilitation. The intention was to apply it to soldiers who had traumatic brain injury from combat. And the engineers all got together and we tried to come up with acronyms, and we came up with some crazy things. But Armstrong is actually not an acronym, but it's really a nod to NASA's technology, Neil Armstrong, and it's a device to make you strong.
Yeah, a question about sort of when I want to do interdisciplinary work, one way is to just get a book and read a new field and get lost for a while and do it all by myself, or have my group do it on their own, which is kind of fun. And then the other side is to get a collaborator. And I find one is, they have different properties and efficiencies. So I was just curious on your thoughts on the difference of those two.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, so I have more stories of failed collaborations than successful ones because they missed one of those ingredients, right? And I think the most important component is the people. Right, so if you have an opportunity to identify a collaborator where you can get that spark of a shared objective, goal, mutual respect for the scientific contributions, it can be really magical, but you can't always get that, and then you just go dig into it yourself. Most of my PhD research was also quite interdisciplinary. I was doing psychophysical studies to understand human perception of virtual environments that I was creating with hardware and software, and I dug into books. And then I had to go find some committee members for my PhD defense at the end of it all. And I, nervously walked over to the psychology department at Vanderbilt and found a few who, and I think it was through that I started to recognize that, I don't have to figure it all out myself. But sometimes it is more fun to get that expertise from an outsider, but it's not always more efficient, indeed.
Well, wonderfully reassuring to hear how well robotics can help people. But I'm spending a bunch of time looking at how robotics are replacing people. I wonder what your thoughts are about how do we, as we get more and more sophisticated robotics, how do we ensure that helping transcends the past?
So I definitely think that there's application domains where robotics has the potential to replace people. But it's really specific slivers. It needs to be, you think about automation and manufacturing. It needs to be a controlled environment, a repetitive process where you can program something and it just does it repeatedly. I actually, I don't know if you've seen the footage from there's a DARPA challenge for humanoid robots, and there's some great fail footage of how many of these robots can't walk, can't open the door, can't do so many things. I think we have a long way to go to have capable robots that are multifunctional. So we're really good at designing a robotic device for a particular application. But in so many spaces, having that human expertise sort of supervising the robot is really essential. So I think that there are going to be jobs replaced by robots. I think there's going to be new jobs and opportunities for humans. I think we need to concern ourselves with how we train the future workforce for that environment. But I would say you're safe for a few decades at least.
I had a question about the device that was hooked up to the body and then was able to get input from human language, so English. So what exactly did that item do? And was it for someone would speak and then somehow you'd feel the phonemes on your arm, and then what would happen? I somehow missed the connection
Sure.
between the spoken language and the device.
So we are only doing the second half of that. So assuming that we want to display a word. So again, the context was a Facebook problem that they wanted to solve. So imagine you're sending and receiving text messages. So this would be the receiving part. So I want to send you a message, maybe I type it and it goes. We weren't solving the capturing of spoken language part. But the device itself, if you have words that you break down to phonemes, you play those phonemes in subsequent cues of 350 milliseconds each. You display them to the wearer, and they process that, and they'll do the perceptual processing and cognitive processing to understand what those phonemes are based on the training that they received previously. So they were trained to understand the mapping of a particular phoneme is felt with a particular pattern. And then after that training, we would ask them to put those together to understand the words to recognize the words that we were displaying.
So it's basic research so they can kind of understand language from haptic
Yes.
input, because what, they can't hear or they can't
Yeah, so
the
I
text?
think that there's a couple of possible applications. So for everyday individuals, one application would be just private messaging, right? So if you think about there's some interest in the ability to send messages privately, right? Auditory, it can be picked up by other people, even visual, somebody might see your phone. If you could just convey this haptically, then your message is just for you. In terms of other applications, the application domains that we're looking at, one would be the visually impaired. Some of this haptic technology has also been used for individuals who are both deaf and blind, who need to think about other modalities of transmission of language, but it also could be supplemental. So there's a good bit of literature that shows that if you're signing and lip reading simultaneously, your performance is better than doing one alone. So this could be just another channel where we would supplement the information that's being provided to improve the cognitive processing. The third area would be if you've got overload of other channels. I think this one remains to be tested. If you've overloaded the visual channel, could you get more information in if you transmit it haptically? It's unclear if people could do the switching between those tasks appropriately, but that's something that we're hoping to work on with collaborators in psychological sciences.
So it seemed to me like you focused on a particular aspect of creativity where you already had a problem to solve and then you formed a team to solve the problem. How about the prior creative act of just having a conversation with people in other fields and discovering a question you hadn't thought of yourself?
Excuse me. So I think I've found a lot of interesting opportunities to translate research that we've done in one domain to another domain through conversations. So I'm not going to necessarily speak to just that initial spark of, oh, I have this idea of how we can do something. But when I first, the transition into robotic rehabilitation was because I was NASA funded for my PhD. I moved to Houston, I go to NASA, I find a robotics lab, and they were teleoperating a humanoid robot. So basically they had a human who was using these controllers, and the humanoid robonaut would follow. And they were finding it really difficult to train those teleoperators because the robot had some inherent safety features where it would move away from the commands you were giving it if those commands put it in strange poses. And brainstorming with the engineers there, well, maybe an exoskeleton could be used to train the teleoperators or whatever. So we started developing an exoskeleton to train robonaut teleoperators. And at the same time, there was, awareness from conferences and things that people are starting to look at the application of robots for rehabilitation. And there's this medical center across the street. So I just started, going to some meetings and finding seminars and talking to people and reading the literature on my own, right? Digging into motor learning literature and finding that there's a lot of parallels between training and motor recovery. and those techniques, and that was how we sort of adapted our exoskeleton for rehabilitation. And then the third piece that was really interesting switch as well was all that data that we collect with the robot to assess how our stroke participants are recovering and how their movements become smoother. We've been able to translate that to surgical skill training. You see really similar trends in how movements become smoother and more coordinated as people acquire specialized skill in surgery, just like somebody recovering from a stroke. So, and those happen through, put yourself in new environments and networking opportunities and start talking to somebody. You sit next to somebody on an airplane, you share what you do, and you never know what connections you might find.
Thank you very much, Marcia. This is a wonderful talk. I really appreciate you closing us out on this year's series on creativity. Thank you very much.
Thank you.